What's going on, guys? Welcome back to yet another episode of AJ Porter Golf. This week we had Bret Kelly. Bret has a ton of experience in sort of a different way. So, Bret has worked with Olympic ski teams, he has worked in the National Baseball League. Uh, just an awesome video. I've known Bret for quite a while and really enjoyed this one. A little bit of a different take, but still, what's the difference? Hope you enjoy. All right, Bret, what's going on, man? How are you?
Doing good. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, no problem. So, I know you and I have spoken over the years, and I'm just glad to have you on. But ultimately, we talked a little bit before this, but this is the fourth video in a set of videos where our goal is to establish a question that I've been asking guys for years. I've asked you, like, what the difference is between certain levels, right? So for me, it's mini tours, high level amateurs, professionals, that sort of a thing. It's a fact finding mission, if you will, and we're trying to basically develop a list of these are the things that really make the difference. You've worked with some of the greatest athletes all around the world, right? You've been a part of the Olympic ski team. You've been a part of the Chicago White Sox organization. You work now with Exos, who trains NFL players for the combine. I mean, you've been all around, so I felt like it'd be really interesting to have you on to kind of talk about, you know, one part of it, which is going to be the physical side that we're going to get into a little bit, but then and also, the nutrition side with some of your different businesses that you have, but also, maybe talk a little bit about the mental side. So we've been finding, and for those who've been listening, we found 3 to 4 keys thus far in the golf world, which is 180 ball speed, excellent lag putting, meditation, and an element of timing. So just wanted to give you a little bit of background and say welcome.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Like I said, excited to kind of dive into this and talk about just my experiences.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. So if you want to I gave a little bit of a background there, but if you want to give people at home a little bit more of a background about who you are, what your accolades are, and kind of what your experience is.
Sure. So yeah, born and raised here in St. Louis. Got undergrad and graduate degree exercise science, and then ended up getting an internship out with the U.S. ski team. So I did my first kind of, I guess, actually that was unpaid. So I was out there for about 10 months in Park City, Utah. Went from there to minor league baseball, just from connections I had with the ski team. I actually worked for the Cardinals for a season. They kind of, with those minor league gigs, some of the teams will just pay in season. So in the off season, it was, one of those good luck. We'll see you next season, hopefully, kind of thing. I needed money, so I went out and looked for another job, and I was lucky enough to have an opportunity at St. Louis University. So I worked there, just with baseball, softball, swimming, diving, field hockey. One of the typical strength and conditioning coach that's quote part time. But working 60 hours a week, which is pretty standard and in that industry. Plan was to stay there for a little bit and get more experience. But my coordinator from the Cardinals called me, and she had somebody reaching out to her from the White Sox looking for a full-time position, and she recommended me. So I was lucky enough to work 3 seasons for the Sox. Bounced around the minor leagues there, living in Phoenix and Montana and North Carolina and a little bit all over. And then, we were coming home third season. I had got contacted by somebody again with the U.S. ski team that was just looking for somebody to take over the free ski position. And they knew me and thought I'd be a good role for that. And got offered that position that off season. So I moved basically from North Carolina back to Phoenix to St. Louis. And then, like in a month, I was back over in Park City, Utah, where my girlfriend at the time moved, and then me and my wife lived out there for 4 years and got married, and then the ski team's great, but the travel is not great for family because you're straight up gone for months at a time. So we kind of knew the goal was always to move back home and get closer to family. So we decided to do that right before the pandemic, which was pretty much the worst timing possible to see
Yeah, it
family.
was.
Should have stayed in the mountains and just skied.
Yeah.
But we did move back here in St. Louis in 2019, and I started working, like you said, for Exos. So now I work for Exos as a senior general manager. I run 2 sites here where we partner with Mercy Hospital. We do, like you said, testing. We do training for NFL Combine stuff. We work with I think 15 hockey teams now.
Oh,
AAA Blues, Lindenwood's University's D1 men's team, Total Package Hockey, TPH here in St. Louis, and a handful of other teams. And then we have everything from like just general adult training to late stage rehab where we work with our Mercy's therapist too. So kind of a little bit all over the board. But to now here in St. Louis, me and my wife live in St. Charles, and we have two little girls. So I'm the only man in the house, outnumbered.
yeah, busy man. It sounds like with all that going on. I can't imagine having two under the age of 3.
It's chaotic, but it's okay. We
Yeah,
originally
no,
planned
it
three. I don't know if it's going to happen ever.
makes sense. So, ultimately, would like to kind of get in a little bit, not to plug Exos too hard, but would like to get into a little bit of what you do just at Exos right now in terms of, maybe athlete development with your hockey players, and then we'll kind of pivot into maybe what you were doing with the ski team and the Sox for those
Yeah.
players.
I mean, I think as far as like athletic development for a standard athlete, it's not as different from sport to sport as a lot of people think. I have those conversations all the time with parents that are asking, is this basketball specific or hockey specific? And, there's definitely parts that you could consider like, specific to that sport. But in general, especially if you're a development athlete, I always think just like those big building blocks are what most people need. If you talk to majority of the high level athletes and they talk about the things that got them to where they are, it's going to be some of those basic building blocks. So, when I'm building a program, we're going to be doing some type of squat pattern, some type of hip hinging, some type of upper body push and pull, vertical, horizontal, rotation, lateral, making sure we're checking all those boxes. And I think sometimes people almost, put the cart ahead of the horse and they try to emulate what they see their high level athletes doing, not understanding that they've probably spent more time. Actually, I know that they've spent more time doing those fundamental things to get to the point that they can do those high level, crazy athletic things that are very looking sport specific. So, if we're working with free skiers or we're working with young hockey players, most of them don't have a huge background in fitness, right? Those are very skill based sports. So we're trying to just build up that foundation at this point.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'd like to sit on that for a minute. I think it's very similar to golf, right? Like we see a lot of golfers that are doing, maybe it's the Golf Forever program or just different things. And we had Scott Fawcett on here who does a lot of the course management strategy for like probably half the PGA Tour at this point. And he was talking about how different he's seeing a shift in the strength development of up and coming PGA Tour players. Like it's not anymore the guy that's going to be 5'8" hitting it 260 out there that's going to be out there. It's the guys that have these building blocks that you're talking of. So whenever it comes to like basic building blocks, do you have any sort of basic parameters? Like let's say maybe a pitcher or a skier in terms of like force output or weight or anything that you're looking for, or is it kind of a sliding scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think a sliding scale a little bit. I mean, we definitely have specific metrics to sports from time to time. If you're part of a team and you guys do some type of testing, it's really good to kind of look at that team's average because you're going to have an average of kids that are the same age doing the same sport. So I typically don't try to compare one sport to the other all the time because somebody that's good in hockey, their body type might make them better at that sport versus a football player,
Hmm.
right? And even in those different positions. But for skiing, I know we look at a lot of times we're trying to get you strong, but how strong is strong enough? Like if you get double your body weight, is doing triple your body weight going to make you a better half pipe skier? Like probably not.
Okay.
We actually
Yeah.
tried to like dive into those numbers and we had the data to do that, which was nice. We looked back and we kind of broke up like if you're a World Cup skier versus if you are a rookie versus if you made the Olympics versus if you won the Olympics, like are there any parameters that are breaking stuff up? And what we saw was a lot more of things that are going to keep you from getting injured so you can spend more time doing your skill-based sport. And I would say golf falls right in line with that.
Yeah.
Baseball, hockey, skiing, all that kind of stuff. Like there's such skill-based sports that getting stronger to a certain point isn't necessarily going to make you better. But if you're not strong enough to even, you know, either get into that sport or stay healthy, then that's really what matters. So for us, when we used to do force plate testing, we did isometric back squat testing, which is you're at 90-degree knee angle, you get under a bar that's not going to move, push into it as hard as you can. And there's force plates under your feet that measure how much force you produce. We were at I think it was 1.5 times your body weight was basically that like number where if you were underneath that, there was statistically way more injuries. So that was a big
Wow.
key for us for skiing, at least specifically. And I would assume that
Sure.
something like that would kind of fall in line with a lot of other sports.
Yep.
Um, and then I think one of the other things you can think of is, again, when it comes to injuries and stuff, is looking at your acute to chronic load ratios. And what that means is what have you done in the last month? And then what are you planning on doing or what have you done this week? So if you ramp up stuff too quickly, whether that be volume or intensity, so how many swings you take in or how hard you're actually trying to swing, right? If you
Yeah.
ramp it up too quickly, you're going to increase your risk for injuries, right? So there's some research showing that your chronic to acute load ratio should be underneath 1.5. And what that means is your average week, your average last 7 days shouldn't be more than 150% than your average 30 days. So that's stuff that I've tracked as well. And you can
Okay.
look at that. I look at load a lot of different ways. Simplest way that I've done it in the past for somebody that doesn't, have an Apple Watch or anything like that is I'll ask people, and I built questionnaires on Google, and you can track all this kind of stuff yourself pretty easily. But I'll ask them how hard was their workout, and then like scale of 1 to 10, and then how long did they work in minutes, and you can just multiply those together, and that gives you a load for that workout, right? So that way you can go out, you can go out and play golf, you can go run, you can go swim, you can go work out. All those things can be quantified with this number and added together on like a load for the day, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Nowadays, there's so many wearables that can kind of give you some type of load. So, I think utilizing any of those to kind of making sure you're not increasing that volume or increasing that intensity too quickly is probably a huge piece of it too.
Yeah, no, I think that's really an interesting point because one of the big pillars that's on this what's the difference process has been 180 miles an hour ball speed, which is around roughly, 120-mile-an-hour club speed. And we've seen a common trend of those like Bryson DeChambeau as of late doing, and honestly, all the PGA Tour at this point have been doing speed training, right? So and, been getting some questions like, oh, how much speed training should you do? What does that kind of look like? And so I think it's really interesting to hear from your side that you should be conscientious of one, how much speed training you're doing in a week and not to just go like full out for injury prevention, but then also all the other stuff that you're doing throughout the week, how that ties into the load for the week. That's something I had never even considered
Yeah.
before.
I started doing that with my aerials athletes. We do summer training where I didn't do this, but they would jump on skis into the water, and they have to hike back up basically to the top of the jump. So like, the actual sport itself is 5 seconds. They're going off one jump and doing triple flips, right?
Yep.
But they got to swim with all their crap on, with their skis, get out of the water, hike all the way back up, and they'll do 10 to 20 jumps. Plus, they lift with me. Plus, we do cardio. Plus, if they have some type of therapy they got to do, like all that stuff piles on top of each other. Some of them, their job is to go and do shows where they jump off more jumps because they get paid to be acrobatic athletes. So it's just like becomes this whole shit show, honestly, of like volume, and it's just trying to figure out how you could track that. So for me, that was the easiest way to track it with my athletes. And then we looked at other stuff too. We looked at body weight. We looked at resting heart rate. We looked at HRV if you have a capacity to look at HRV. And, all that stuff tells you an overall picture of how the athlete's doing. Not everybody's body is going to react the same way. So if my body's starting to get overworked, I might start losing weight. I might get sick. My heart rate, resting heart rate might change. You might have something completely different. You could actually feel like crap. I could feel fine maybe or whatever. So
Yeah.
as a coach, like I used to look at all those things and, if something popped up, it would just give me a red flag to have that conversation. So, if you are tracking that and you're above that 1.5, it's just, let's have that conversation. Let's be aware that this might be a possibility. We need to start pulling back on some stuff.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting, especially whenever it comes to, we've really seen a change in trends in the golf world of, it used to be kind of thought that, oh, if you're going to be a professional golfer, you got to grind for 8 hours a day and whatever else. And at least for myself personally, whenever I've tried that, I just get like burnt, right? Like it gets to a point where the volume of work, I almost feel like is at a point of diminishing returns. And you're seeing some of these older guys that are now on Champions Tour, like Steve Stricker. I heard him in an interview the other day, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I do the same three drills and I practice for an hour a day, and I'm kind of set up." So I don't know if you see any differences in terms of like people that get a lot more efficient with the work that they do. Obviously, it's a little different in your world, but I don't know if you've seen any of that.
That kind of was making me think of, so I do jujitsu too, and that was kind of making me think of the way different people train in jujitsu is like, are you saying that golfers a lot of times like it's like just go out there and play for 8 hours kind of thing, or in
Well, like yeah, so like
driving range and whatever?
driving range, putt, whatever else, and you'll have guys like myself or guys who are doing it for a living full time. They'll just grind for 8 hours, and it's just like I've been hearing and kind of seeing, at least personally, like point of diminishing returns in
Yeah.
terms of not actually getting anything done. It's quantity over quality, and I'm starting to see a trend of people being like, okay, what can we do to improve the quality of what we're doing?
Yeah, I think I've kind of two thoughts on that. So again,
Yeah.
going back to the jujitsu thing, um, talking with a lot of people that compete and are like good black belts, they've all taught me at least that it's better to learn, I guess, if you're getting put in situational positions and practicing from those positions like a handful of times versus just like rolling live or playing golf for 8 hours or rolling live for 8 hours in a week. Like I'd rather be put in this position and like train live just in that position. So I think it's just figuring out what you need to work on or figure out what drills work for you and like making sure
Mhm.
we're doing those at a high level. Because if you're
Yep.
just doing those at 50%, but you're doubling the volume, like, are you actually getting better at that? Probably not.
Yeah.
And that's such an individual basis too. So that's kind of tricky as well. So it's going to take that person to figuring out like what is it that they need to work on specifically and making sure we have, time for all that stuff because there's probably 1,000 things you want to work on, but like trying to figure out what are those handful of things you can work on today, actually.
Yeah. No, I think that's very important, and it kind of ties back into, so I had Ryan Sullivan on the podcast who has played two US Opens, and he talked about having autonomy in your game, right? And having a understanding, and the biggest difference for him was having an understanding of what kind of the key things are, and then being able to segment that. So it's interesting you bring that up.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
think that,
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
no, you're good.
Yeah. Yeah. So getting into, a little bit in the weeds of actually, you know, for someone who just is starting out fresh, they want to, potentially maybe there's someone who has 150-mile-an-hour ball speed and they're a 10 handicap and they really want to gain some speed, right? What are kind of the core building blocks? And maybe they have a little bit of mobility issues. What are maybe kind of some core building blocks for someone who's just getting started in fitness all the way up? And we'll talk later about kind of that elite guy, but for now, maybe kind of some core building blocks of where you'd start people out.
Yeah, I mean, just like any athlete, if you come in and you don't have much experience or very little experience, like you said, that those foundational things are, like I said, they're going to be some of those basic movement patterns where I don't care if it's with a barbell, a kettlebell, a dumbbell, but some type of double leg squat pattern, some type of single leg squat pattern. So it can be a lunge, a step down, anything like that.
Mhm.
I like to make sure everybody's doing some lateral work as too. So like a lateral lunge, right? Or a lateral step up.
Mhm.
Hip hinging motions. A lot of people don't realize that they have a hip joint and they always try to just bend their back. So making sure we actually are utilizing those hips, leaning forward, doing some type of RDL or hip hinging motion as in a deadlift. And then working your way up to the upper body. So doing horizontal push. So, some type of bench, horizontal pulls, rows, upper body press, upper body rowing, and then rotational work, which, for me, I do a lot of med ball tosses and stuff as well. So I think coming off the very first thing I'm going to do if I have a new person in is like when I'm writing that program for the week, I'm making sure I'm checking all those boxes throughout that week. How you get to that, there's 1,000 different ways you can do that, right? As far as if you want to do all upper body and then all lower body, or personally, I like to do all push movements in one day and all pulling movements the next day, just because I feel like I get a full total body both days then. So for me, that's kind of what I would try to get somebody in there and getting in at least 3 days a week of lifting.
Yeah, no, and then, is there any sort of a general rep range that you like to stay within
Yeah,
for
for the
someone?
foundational
Yeah,
phases, we'll do 10 to 15. And most of that, again, is going to be lower intensity. And, by that, I mean weight.
yeah,
We're just trying to get the body used to those movement patterns, get the joints used to some of that tensile load of actually having that extra weight. We're not trying to necessarily build that pure strength side of things yet. So, depending on how much experience the person has, and how much time we have to train, I guess, like overall, as far as weeks go. I probably would be doing at least one or two blocks of that. So a block for me is 4 to 6 weeks. So you're thinking 8 to 12 weeks of doing like a foundational slash hypertrophy style of training in those reps. And then you can start, changing that to more of that strength side of things. And now we're thinking, reps of like 2 to 6. So starting off on those higher reps, and then week by week, you can kind of chip away to some of the lower rep schemes where you're having that higher intensity. For me, excuse me, you're not doing strength work unless you're at 80% or above, really. And that's kind of where that like 5 or 6 rep range starts as well. So if you don't know what your percentages are, just think like, 8 out of 10 intensity.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And then moving on now to someone who's maybe a little bit more experienced, kind of trying to branch over into being a little bit more of, that elite athlete. Is there anything you'd really change, or is it just keep hammering those fundamentals? And we're ultimately the goal is we're trying to produce more speed is
Mhm.
the goal.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some stuff I would change. I would probably just start looking more on how the overall body is moving, because you've done some of those fundamentals, and I think there's still a good part to kind of always go back to those fundamentals. But when you're at those higher intensity um, things, we want to make sure we're actually doing things that are going to produce more force out of the ground. So a lot more high level med ball throwing, higher speed training with barbells, or dumbbells or whatever. So just kind of moving at more of a power based setting, and more plyometrics. I think also making sure we utilize what we call functional range conditioning. FRC is going to be like, trying to think of an example here. So for a rotational athlete, if I'm a right-handed, if I'm swinging right-handed, that front leg is going to have a lot of internal hip rotation, right? Because you're rotating over that front
Mhm.
leg. So if you have either poor internal hip rotation, that might be something that we need to work on, or maybe you're just weak there. We need to do more lateral work, internal hip rotational work. That's a whole different story. But let's say you have some flexibility issues there. Let's work on the flexibility there, but then let's also make sure that's strong as well. So functional range conditioning is basically putting those joints at end range of motion,
Mhm.
in like a pattern that's going to cause some of those muscles to fire and have to stabilize that joint at the end range of motion. So if you Google shin box, or if you know what 90-90s are with your hips,
Yep.
those are a very good example of internal hip rotation for your hips. I love doing shin box get ups where I'm in that like 90-90 position with my legs, and I'm driving those knees in the ground and I'm coming up. So it's causing that back femur to internally rotate.
Yep.
And then I'll try to pick that back foot off the ground and drive that back knee in, which again is going to cause that femur to internally rotate, and I'm having to actually actively do that versus just like passively stretching. So making sure we're getting both of those in as well. And I'll utilize that stuff a lot early on, either for my warm-ups, prepping before we get over and start doing some of the more advanced stuff, but making sure we have that stability in that hip. And then from there, once we feel comfortable that that hip is starting to get more stable and mobile and warm, that's when we're adding in some of that power-based stuff, right? Because it's going to be hard to add the power in if you're lacking that mobility there, because you're just going to have that like that wall you're pushing up against, right? And that could potentially
Mhm.
cause injury or just lack of peak rotation, right? Because something's stopping you.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So, I spent some time with some various different people who do TPI. TPI is the Titleist Performance Institute. If you're in golf, I'm sure you've heard of it at some point. If you've not, it's really golf centric mobility testing and all those sort of things, and they give you a handicap. I'm like super limited on left hip internal rotation, and it's really interesting that you bring that up because it's like you said, like you're pushing up against a wall, and I can kind of actually relate to that in my own, even though I've done a ton of 90-90 work and shin box work and all that stuff. But it's really interesting for you to bring that up. So I guess if we were to kind of distill it, it's like let's make sure that we have the foundation of the strength, and then we do mobility, and then we're transitioning into the final phase, which is kind of building on that mobility. Did you agree? That's kind of a
Yeah,
roadmap.
I mean, I think the final phase is going to be like the pure power stuff. So it's like I'll always like do foundational stuff, like the most basic movements, and then we're going to do mobility. If we see issues in mobility, we're going to try to add some strength there as well, which is the FRC. And then like my next step after that, especially for that internal hip rotation, is like, all right, let's get a med ball and start doing some rotational throws, because now we're like doing that power into that hip potentially.
Yep.
Potentially, probably heavier than your what your club's going to be,
Sure.
and going from there. So, um, you know, just listening to you two talk about that your front left hip, if that's something you have worked on and doesn't seem like it's necessarily getting better too, like also know like all of us aren't built the same. Like
Hmm.
there's bony structures, people's hips are completely different. You can look back at like literally fossils of people and like bones of people from specific countries that hips shapes are different and their genes are going to be different. So there's a lot of to be said for a lot of the Olympic lifters and a lot of power lifters have genes from Eastern Bloc countries because they usually have shallower hips and they can get in deeper squats easier. It's not everybody, but they have the higher set of genes that does allow that. So, like, again, everybody's going to be built a little bit differently there too. So, it might not be necessarily a mobility thing. It might just be how you're built kind of thing. And it's okay, what can we change to potentially still accommodate that? So, can you rotate that left foot out a little bit? Because then you're starting to have some external rotation before you even have to go into that internal rotation. So it gives you some more clearance. And I don't know if that's something you've ever
Right.
played with and not trying to
It
teach
is, and
anything
it's what
by
I
any
do
means.
actually. So that's
There you go.
yeah.
So
But
yeah, you fix it.
that's exactly what I do. Is that's what my coach and I are working on that. So, yeah, I think that's really honestly a perfect segue into the one of the main topics of the podcast, which is what's the difference, right? So, you mentioned, maybe some genetic differences, but do you think, in the world of elite sports, do you think it's a lot of genetics? Do you think there's an ability to grind your way to get to a certain level of professional sports? What do you really feel like is the difference in people, that maybe make it versus don't? And we've heard the stories of the grinders, but do you feel like they exist?
Yeah. So um, I think there's both, and there's a really good book on this called The Sports Gene that I would highly recommend you check out. It goes into more anecdotal evidence of both things happening. So you have the people that are genetic freaks that almost despite their own getting their own way so much, they're still elite, right? And we all can probably point to people in different sports that do that and know people that have gotten there because of that. And then there's people that are the exact opposite of that genetically. They weren't given anything, but they have the mindset to just grind, 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 and make it happen that way as well. So we know like both those things can happen. And I think the real freaks, I guess, that you that you see, like as far as like the best of the best, are a combination of both of those. So when you think of somebody like from St. Louis, we talk about Albert Pujols, one of the best hitters of all time. Like that guy worked his ass off, and he was a genetic freak. So you're
Yeah.
going to be the best of all time if that happens, right? So I think we all start off at different levels of a genetic ability to do whatever that sport is. Some of us, are going to genetically be able to do more distance running and run a marathon faster than somebody else. It doesn't mean that I can't get better at running a marathon and eventually, potentially like compete with other people. But I'm going to have to change my body type quite a bit to get there. And it's going to take a lot of volume and hard work for me to get there. Right. So where are you starting and where are you trying to end is the biggest part of it too. And then I think some of that, the genetics also pushes us into potentially different sports. So I think without even thinking about it, some of us just are going to be better at another sport because of whatever our genes are. And because of that, we're going to probably gravitate towards those sports that we're already good at. So when you see people that are like taller in basketball or shorter weightlifters, it's like people say weightlifting like can stunt your growth. Weightlifting doesn't stunt your growth, but people that are short are better at weightlifting. So same thing with basketball. Basketball's not making you tall, but people that are taller are going to gravitate towards basketball. You still
Yeah.
have people like Nate Robinson who win the dunk competition, but very, very
I always forget
different
about him.
way of
I
winning a
always
dunk.
forget about him.
Dude, yeah, he's like 5'8", five
Yeah.
nine. He dunked over Dwight Howard to win the dunk
Yeah.
competition. Like that's
Yeah.
fucking insane.
Yeah.
Speaking of, there's one really good story in that book. I'm keep looking up at it. I have it right up there. Um, there was two guys that made the Olympic, I don't know what Olympics it was, Olympic high jumping team. One of them was a guy here in St. Charles who went to Lindenwood, played basketball. One of his friends was on track, and the story was that he went out just to like jump with his friends, messing around, and like the track coaches saw how high this kid could jump and offered him a scholarship, which he didn't have from basketball. So he came out, and within a year, he ended up making the Olympics. So just genetic freak, right? Like There's a reason he played basketball. Like he could clearly jump, but like he could
Yeah.
jump higher than other people could in that specific manner of the high jump as well. In the same Olympics, there's another kid who grew up in a certain town. Yeah, I can't remember what country, but in Europe, where high jumping was like the thing to do out there. And he had a pit in his backyard and grew up high jumping his entire life. He was like, again, I think it was like 6 inches shorter than the average high jumper. Like, did not have the genetic makeup to specifically be good at high jumping. And they actually tested his the MRIs on his Achilles, and his jump leg has was twice as thick as his other leg. So he had changed his body type by jumping so much and doing the volume of so much. So they both got into the Olympics in very different ways. So it just goes to show you that like you can get there in different ways. It just we're all going to start off at a different point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Did you see much of a discernible difference between maybe guys that were in the minors versus the majors, and maybe same guys that were in girls that were in trials versus those that actually made the team? Did you see much of a difference?
Yeah, I mean, again, like you're always going to have those people that just make it because of their natural ability in general.
Hmm.
But overall, I think mindset is such a huge piece of it. Like on a day to day of not letting, I don't know, some of the inevitable downs like change your routine sometimes. So some of the guys that I saw in baseball, is such a sport where literally every day is Groundhog's Day. So it's like, if you're gonna strike out 4 times today, well, guess what? You got 4 chances tomorrow too, man. So like, stop woe is me and get your ass up,
Yeah.
get your work in. It becomes an overall an average thing. If your average is better than the guy next to you, eventually you're gonna pass him up. So
Yeah, no, I think that's really good and kind of want to pivot into the mental side of things. Like the mental side of things, and as we're finding and know, it's such a huge part of golf. I mean, did you guys do much in terms of either meditation, visualization, or manifestation or whatever else? Like for me personally, I've seen I got a buddy of mine, John Fogerty, who basically told me like, dude, you have to start meditating and um you have to start manifesting stuff. Like you're not gonna get past where you are right now if you don't start doing something with your brain. And I started doing something with my brain the latter part of this year. I got a win and I've started to really accelerate in terms of my performance. I don't know if that was a big part of what you had people doing or not.
yeah, so we had our own sports psychs a lot of times. So they kind of dealt a lot more with everybody on an individual basis.
Yeah.
I know with the ski team, I probably saw it more than with baseball, as far as guys
Sure.
and girls like just manifesting, meditating. Obviously, like a lot of people grew up in ski towns and kind of have that mindset of wanting to like go do meditation stuff anyway.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But you'd see our athletes at the top of the hill like visualizing what they're going to go do, visualizing their run specifically, and especially with like half pipe and slope style, like it's almost like it's a routine, right? It's like a dance. So they're going down and they're trying to like land those specific tricks. They're trying to think about like those things that they need to see when they're coming around a specific rotation, when they're spotting certain things. So they all worked with our sports psych on visualizing those specific things as far as their like actual um, sport goes. I know with ski racing, one thing we did was we had a VR system where somebody would go down, they'd ski the course, and then we had VR goggles where our athletes could actually like visually see the ski, and then they'd be up there actually, visualizing where they're going to. So there's some cool videos of Michaela Schifrin, who's is now the greatest ski racer of all time officially. He's passed Lindsey Vonn, and as far as wins go, and she still has many years to go. So she's insane. And you can see her every time at the top of the hill with her ski poles in her hand, eyes closed, and she's like leaning and moving from side to side and like going off the jumps like in her head of like the race. So she's visualizing like what's happening and stuff too. So I think that's the biggest thing that I've always noticed too. There were a handful of people that I've worked with that, most of the time they'll try to visualize what that end goal is of like them being on the podium, them like winning, what those feelings are, and then kind of backtrack like, all right, what are those daily steps that I'm gonna take? So that meditation, I think, is more of like a day-to-day meditation in the mornings or in the evenings where I'm actually thinking about that overall end goal. And then I'm actually visually thinking about what are those steps that I need to do today to get there.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. And so in contrary to that, is there anything that you saw? You mentioned attitude earlier. Is there anything that you saw that would just kind of hold people back? I think in a lot of sports there are certain things that attitudes and different things that just really hold people back that maybe could have actually, made something of it.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest one, honestly. The most common one, probably.
Attitude. Yeah.
There's no shortage of people that could have made it and just either, didn't either want to put in the work in the gym or on, the field or potentially in the mental aspect as well. So there was plenty of people that I know that you know did really work hard in the gym and did all the physical things correct. But the second that they would either strike out or miss a jump or something like that, like they just folded, and like they never went to that sports psych to have help with that. And I think that's something that was a huge miss for a lot of those people because it's like this is a hole in your game and you're pushing everything else so hard. Why are you not addressing that as well? Like that helps in worst case, like if it doesn't help you, it's literally a mental thing. Like it's not going to hurt you for by any means. So it's like,
Yep.
why would you not try that?
Yep. No, I think that's a really good point and one for anybody out there who's listening, especially, maybe you're a kid who's a sophomore in high school and you want to play Division 1 golf, but maybe you struggle to manage your emotions or whatever else, which was a really big thing for me. Like I had a really hard time managing my emotions up until the last couple years, just because it can be such an emotional and frustrating game. Um, that it's one is low hanging fruit, but it's one that you have to do to get to the next level. I can't tell you how many mini tour events I've played, and you even hear Scott Fawcett, who just got to final stage of Champions Tour Q School, talked about how much of a hothead he was and why he never made it making professional was because he was a hothead. So, making sure that you manage those things and taking care of them, I think is certainly something that would probably hold a lot of people back.
Yeah, I think we had quite a few people that I was there at the Pyeongchang Olympics, and I had a handful. I specifically remembered these two girls who were really good skiers for us, and they never took the mental side of things seriously. And we were trying to get everybody on the team to at least have some type of routine before, and they didn't necessarily feel like they needed one. They didn't even want to like have a routine of their warm up. They just wanted to ski, and like that's what they grew up doing was just skiing, right? It was for free skiing, so like
Yeah.
weren't big in the gym. Like they just went off jumps, and that's what they like to do. And I
Yeah.
get it. That was like the part of the culture. But this was, their first time going to the Olympics, and it was like, dude, this is like a different level. Like when you're going to be at the Olympics, and I don't think they really bought into thinking that it was going to be that much different than like the X Games because the X Games is huge when you're there, but then you show up at the Olympics, and it's a whole fucking
Totally.
different animal, man.
Yeah,
And
different
like
gravy.
and unfortunately, like we saw them like mentally crumble and like falling on tricks that they shouldn't fall on, that they don't fall on, and that just snowballs on top of itself. You mess up one thing, you have all that pressure of the Olympics around you, which is a whole nother animal. You're living in a different country for a month. Every single person there is trying to, you know, be at the peak of their entire athletic career. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's really interesting. Like I'm definitely starting to see the common thread of mental. This is the fourth one of these I've done now, and this has been most of the conversation.
Yeah.
We actually have a couple sports sites that are going to be coming on
Nice,
a little
dude.
bit later, so you guys want to stay tuned for that, we'll definitely dive into that at a later date. But I'd like to pivot now into something that I know is near and dear to you, which is nutrition. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about general nutrition, and then maybe some differences between your Olympic people and MLB. Obviously, they have different caloric needs and outputs and whatever else. It's so hard to generalize, but if you want to talk about nutrition, which I think is a super critical part of the whole fitness part of things.
Yeah. I mean, I think, if you don't really know what you need, I think going out and finding a sports dietitian is probably step one. I mean, you could probably go out and get a consult for 75 to $100 for some type of sports psych in the area. I think that's a huge part to see kind of what you're missing too. For me, when I have people come in, I'm by no means a dietitian. I have a undergraduate in nutrition, but I don't have any dietetic stuff. But I still want to see what they're eating. So I'll have them do food diaries. I'm like, just write it in your phone, write it on a piece of paper. I don't really care. Use my Fitness Pal, whatever's easy. Bring it in after a week. We kind of see where you're at, get an idea of total calories, get an idea of how much protein you're having, and just get these basic things out of the way, right? It's a lot easier, I find, to see what people are eating right away and start making some subtle changes from that versus me telling them what they need to eat on a daily basis, right? Like it's going to be way easier to change in that way. The biggest issues I usually see are the not enough protein, which for most athletes is going to be between 1.5 and 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight for an athlete if you're doing like strength training and you're being pretty active. For the rest of the general population, and they say like 1 gram per pound of body weight, which for me, I'm 200 pounds. So that's, two, well, if I'm a normal person, it'd be 200 grams, but 300 to 400 grams of protein. That's a shitload of protein. So, which means you're
Yeah, I didn't
probably
know
going to
that.
need a lot of supplementation, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
That's what supplements are for, right? To supplement what you can't have in your diet. Um, I think the other thing is overall calories sometimes are very, for athletes, I find sometimes are very underreported. Again, this is not everybody. We have plenty of minor league baseball players that I worked with that were eating McDonald's every night and everything. But a lot of the athletes I do work with, they feel like they're eating a lot. They feel like they can't gain the muscle. They feel like they're fatigued, blah, blah, blah. We go through what they're eating and they're severely under eating what they need. And I don't think they realize how many calories they actually need because they just think like, oh, I need to eat 2,000 calories. And then they assume what they're eating is 2,000 calories. First off, they probably need way more than 2,000 calories. That's just like the overall average standard that we get told from, we don't need to go into too much about why the government sucks. But anyways, um, but the average person or the average athlete is going to need way more than that. So to give you an example, and I tell this to my hockey guys all the time. I think it was 5 years ago. I went into Lindenwood, and they have a sports science lab. So they have a RMR setup, which basically you take a nap for 20 minutes. They put this bag kind of thing over your face. It measures how much oxygen you consume. So they can convert that to telling you specifically how many calories your body burns if you do nothing. So if I slept all day, how many calories my body needs just to be alive. And for me, at that time, in the bigger yard, the higher that's going to be too. Younger yard, it'll be higher. It was like 2,600 calories. So like if I literally did nothing, I need 2,600 calories. And people in their brain have it like, oh, I need to eat 2,000 calories. Well, if I'm an athlete, first off, moving around throughout the day, I probably burn another like 3 to 500. Just
Hmm.
for me, at least, I'm on my feet a lot. If I'm working out, again, another 3 to 500. And am I trying to gain weight maybe? Then I need to be maybe another 3 to 500. So I'm probably looking at 3,500 to 4,000 calories is what I was needing to potentially maintain or gain weight. That's a shitload of food.
Yeah, it is.
And I have kids coming in that I'm like, what'd you have for breakfast? And they're like, oh, I don't like eating breakfast. Or I didn't eat breakfast. Or I had toast. I'm like, motherfucker, I had 800 calories already today. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
They're playing hockey twice a day and lifting with me or whatever. Or if you're a golfer, you're out there walking the course for at least 18 holes. If you're doing more, 36,
6
whatever.
miles. Yeah,
Yeah, doing
six
miles,
to 7 miles. Yeah.
potentially getting a lift in as well, maybe doing more swings, and especially with you guys in the summer, like you're burning any more calories because it's 100 fucking degrees outside.
Yep.
So I think this total number of calories is such a hugely underrated thing that people don't pay attention to for sure. I mean that in protein, like again, just the fundamentals, I'd say those two for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's great. And you mentioned earlier everyone's favorite topic. They love to skip over the fundamentals, but supplements. So I don't know if you have any must have, must take supplements for people,
Um, I
or if
mean,
it's kind of
the only I'll put it this way. I take like multivitamins and stuff too, but the only supplements that have been like 100% proven in every research to work is protein, caffeine, which is a supplement, and creatine. Creatine, I would say everybody needs to be taking. I make my parents take it because it has a lot more cognitive effects. They're starting to realize it's
really.
showing that it's helping reduce the risk for Alzheimer's. They've known now for like 5 years that if you're loaded on creatine, you recover better from concussions, which doesn't happen in golf a lot, but just you never know in your life.
Yeah.
It's an extremely cheap supplement and it's
Yeah.
super easy to take. So like everybody honestly should be taking that. And then if you are looking to gain muscle or gain strength, Creatine helps you kind of buffer your quicker energy stores in your muscle. So let's say you're doing a bench press at a certain weight that you could normally get 8 reps of. If you're loaded on creatine, you might be able to get 9 or 10. It's not
Mhm.
going to make you necessarily stronger, but it'll allow you to have more of that quicker energy in your muscle for a little bit longer of a period of time. So if you're doing a hypertrophy or a higher rep phase, like absolutely that's going to help you load up too. So, for something like that, it's just 5 grams a day. That's the standard for thing of creatine. Like I said, you can get a couple months of it for like $20.
Yeah,
Creatine monohydrate. So I would say if you are getting supplements, there's other stuff out there where there's some research shows that it might work, it might not work, blah. I personally don't dive into a ton of that because I don't necessarily want to waste my money if it doesn't work. I do,
right.
like I said, multivitamins. I just have a reds and greens where I get my multivitamins from. And I think, again, that's more or less to try to fill some of those gaps. Um, Ideally, you're getting all the stuff you need from food, but we know that's not going to happen all the time. So I just try to have like a multivitamin, in case I'm eating like shit for a couple days or something. But those are my
Sure.
my big keys, I would say.
Thoughts in general, and I bring it up because I do partner with an electrolyte brand. Thoughts on supplementing electrolytes for those that are, either actively working out or maybe first thing in the morning. Do you think there's some importance to it, or
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So I guess when I was talking about supplements, I should have included electrolytes in that too. I guess I don't know. For me, I
yeah,
don't really think about them as supplements, but I guess they are technically. So
yeah,
yeah, no, I think that stuff's super important. Hydration is a huge key.
mhm,
And we know that you know, when you're dehydrated, your risk for injury goes up. Your also concentration level goes down like substantially. I don't have the research just in the front of my brain or anything right now, but there's a bunch of research showing like what percentage dehydration you like. I think it was like 10% dehydrated, and they were like reducing their cognitive ability by like 50%. So it was like if you're trying to concentrate on something, which I assume that you're probably trying to do, especially when you're like in the
huh,
heat and maybe it's like your
yeah.
last couple of holes and you're in the
Hands are shaking because you're
hands
nervous
are
because you're
shaking,
playing
you're
a tournament.
nervous, and you're
Yeah,
like a little dehydrated, like that. Why, again, a simple fix. Why would you not just stay hydrated as you're drinking some water there? Good job, buddy. Uh, um, the electrolytes are going to help just keep that in your system a little bit more.
yeah,
Um, so, most of us get, I think in our diet probably get enough sodium anyway.
mhm,
But if you are out there in the summer heat and stuff, I think just
yeah.
having that electrolyte stuff in the morning is going to help just kind of you're going to drink that water and it's going to like stay within your system a little bit better that way too. So
Yep. Nope. I think that's great. Sorry here. My computer just died, or my
I can
monitor
still see
just
you.
died. Oh, that's cool. That's awesome. All right, we're back live. Very, very perfect timing. I decided to kick my monitor. So for those that are listening at home on audio, I'm sure you'll enjoy that one. Anyways, so I mean, super helpful, man. I think there was a lot of really good information in here. Just kind of to sum it all up, very important to start with the fundamentals in terms of, one, setting out a goal, right? Like, so understand what your goal is, and whether that is to ultimately gain more speed or whatever else. Understanding where you are in that developmental journey, I think is very important step. uh Also very important to do a lot of the mental stuff. I think, as you mentioned, a lot of people don't want to do that work, and it's definitely something that can hold a lot of people back, and is certainly, as we're finding, something that makes the difference. And then also making sure that we're getting really locked in on nutrition. I don't know if you have any parting words or things you'd like to add, but
No, man. I mean, um, I think so many people try to not even do too much, but like they're either worried about what they're doing is not correct, so they don't get started, or they
mhm,
feel like it's too much, so they don't get started or whatever. And it's like, dude, if you can just have a routine, if you haven't done any weightlifting and you can get it in there, like don't fucking worry about like if you're doing the exact right thing. Like if you're in there getting stronger, like you're gonna get better. You're gonna produce more force into the ground if you're going in there and you're getting stronger overall. So I would say as long as you're not like causing harm to your body, then don't necessarily worry about doing the exact right thing. That's just get in there and get some work in. Make sure we're having our basics as far as the nutrition and the supplements go. But that stuff's worked for a long time, and I think so many athletes get extremely far just with that stuff, and then working on the mindset, like you said, there's a huge piece of it as well. So if that is something you struggle with, reach out to somebody. There's probably a thousand, there's probably hundreds of thousands of YouTube videos that can at least help you like learn how to meditate. That's something I've really enjoyed doing myself. I don't play golf or anything. Well, I play golf, but I wouldn't say I play golf. I drink beer in a cart. Um, Lose some balls to the right. AJ's helping me with that.
All right.
But yeah, man, I think having that mindset piece, having the meditation piece, and like learning kind of more about yourself when you're sitting there in the silence of meditation is huge. So I think for anybody to start doing some of that stuff on a regular basis is pretty cool. So yeah, excited for it.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. And I mean, you tied it back in perfectly with Scott Fawcett's one of his three keys, which is meditation. He works with Will Zalatoris, Bryson DeChambeau, a lot of these guys. Every single player he has, he will not work with them if they don't meditate. Like it's
Nice.
just you have to meditate. So yeah, I think that's great, and I appreciate the time today, my man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Thanks, brother.
Yep.